retired from all administrative work, and he suddenly got this request to set up and organize the U.S. Biological Warfare Project. I was in Florida at the time. Dad was recovering from a heart attack in Florida, and Ellen was there too, and my mother. So Dad being Dad, he had a conscience. More than I do. I have some conscience, but I don't have much of a conscience by comparison with my father. He had a conscience, so he said, if my government asked me to do this, I must do it. And he did. And he retired very shortly before the end of World War II. He had warned them that when he took the job, that if they didn't recognize that he was in charge and that they were going to have to observe all of the safety precautions that he laid down, that he would retire. And sure enough, they got a new commanding general just a couple of months before the war ended, actually, who refused to accept the design that had been drawn up for the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. Dad had got someone who was the U.S. expert on containing bacteria, keeping them under control, and so this man said, the general said, this man's plans are going to take too long. I can get this army camp built in a much shorter time than that. And I'm going to do it. And Dad said, well, I'm going to retire. Please read the agreement we made when I took this job to begin with. And he did. So for the last couple of months of World War II, Dad was retired. I didn't know this. I read a book about the project years later, and I learned this when I read the book, actually.
So, this is a picture of Buzz running.
As a junior in high school, I had a summer job running the blueprint machine at Fort Detrick. And I was running the blueprints of a new army camp, the Dugway Proving Ground that they were building in Utah.
There's kind of an official tryout process.
Wow. I'm missing the connection
Yeah.
between the bacteriology project and Proving Ground.
Yes, well,
That sounds to
so
me like
you
where
know,
they-
they actually
Seems like I have a chance. So,
set up
but I'm super looking forward to it.
a large project for making bacteria that could be used for offensive warfare. And that was in Utah. That was in Dugway, Utah.
Okay,
And
so
they
that
were
was like
never
a big,
used.
big
They
factory.
were never used, but they were prepared. And they expected to invade Japan at that point. And they had no idea, I think, what they were going to do when they invaded Japan. You know, they had no idea that they were going to drop an atom bomb on Japan. 2 atom bombs, one on Hiroshima,
Like the teams
one
I've
on
heard of, might be like
what was
Nagasaki?
I'm sorry?
Nagasaki?
Nagasaki.
Is that it?
Whitman's winning.
So,
It's noisy. Should we try to move to a different?
yeah, I wonder, can you hear it or you don't know?
But yeah, really, like Oregon is kind
This?
of
Yeah.
I think
Are
you can
we
hear
gonna
it.
be-
But you know,
A lot of
there's
background noise.
yeah,
So
it's hard to
this
tell.
biological warfare project was a collaborative project with the English and the Canadians and I don't know how many other countries, to be honest, but I met the English and Canadian representatives. In fact, I got to know them quite well. Because they were practically like members of the family in Frederick.
There's like,
Should do this videoing,
I'm sorry?
because to do the videoing, there's a lot of background noise.
Yeah.
So we're wondering if we should move to another
Yeah,
place.
sure, we can. I'll be inside. Actually, I don't know what I did think I was going to do, but I didn't think I was ever going to become a scientist.
Well, Mother said that she wanted to be an engineer. I have to sit over here, don't I?
Yes, well, no, this is my deaf ear.
Oh, that's your, okay.
This
good.
is my relatively good ear.
All right.
I can hear you okay.
All right.
Yes, Helen first wanted to be an engineer.
Yeah, that's
and
what I
Dad
remember.
sent her to talk to the Dean of Engineering at Wisconsin. And the first question she asked the Dean was, it wasn't the Dean, it was the Associate Dean, I think, in charge of students. And she asked him, do you have any women engineers? And he said, oh yes, we have some. And she said, what do they do when they graduate? He said, oh, they marry engineers.
Yeah.
Oh. Ouch.
Yeah.
So that was the end of Helen's ambition to be an engineer.
Yeah.
And then she tried being a biochemist, and she was good at it, actually. She was much better at real biochemistry than I was. But
she went into nutrition.
she went into nutrition. That was what women did who went into biochemistry
Okay.
in those days. They didn't do real biochemistry. They did home economics or nutrition.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so we're at, that's World War II. It's probably 1944.
very good.
Yes, we're,
So you
44.
put the, yeah, so
We're-
that's Door County?
well, it could be Door County. I'm guessing it's Maryland.
Well,
I'm guessing it's Ocean City, Maryland.
Well, Mother wrote on the back, Door County.
Oh, I see. All right,
Or
well, that's what it is then.
Jacksonport,
Jacksonport, yes. If it's Jacksonport, it's Door County.
Finch Cottage.
We rented a cabin on the shore of Lake Michigan every summer. But in 1944, yes, I'm puzzled by the 1944 because we would have been in the East. Frederick, Maryland, of course, was in the East. And so we took a vacation on the ocean shore, but that was the Atlantic Ocean, and it was Maryland. And it was
This may be mislabeled.
well, I doubt it. My mother was very systematic, so.
No, but
I-
this is my mother's handwriting.
It looks plausible to me that, yes, Finch County, Door County. Oh, it's Helen's handwriting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my
uh-huh,
mother's
yeah,
handwriting.
yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah. See, and then this is you.
Yes, that's me.
That same time.
Yeah, yeah. So I suppose we must have come back to Door County for our traditional summer vacation. But in 1944, the war was still going on. But Dad had, as I was explaining to Rick, Dad had retired because he objected to the new commanding general who didn't trust Dad's choice of a biological engineer to design the Dugway Proving Ground. And Dad said, well, all right, you have to look at the agreement I signed when I took this job. Either you follow my orders or I quit. And he quit. But he didn't tell us.
You didn't find
And
out. huh?
I didn't know he quit. I didn't know for another, probably 10 years. And I read a book about the project. Because he was very quiet about it. And it was very close to the end of the war that he quit, actually.
But you wouldn't know at that time that the war was ending.
No, no. Well, no. Yes, I think I would know that the war was ending because the newspapers were full of it. The invasion of Normandy had occurred months earlier. The American army was moving towards Germany. So it was pretty obvious that the war in Europe was ending. And then the question was, would we invade? Really, the question was, when would we invade Japan? How would we invade Japan? And it turned out we didn't invade Japan. Instead, we dropped atom bombs.
So, tell me a little bit about your mother.
Yeah.
We called her grandmother.
Yeah.
This was grandfather and grandmother.
Yeah. Well, they had a very traditional marriage for those days. Life is different now, but in those days, a wife raised the children and cooked the food, and that was it. And Dad met Mother at Purdue, where they were both students. Dad was the sixth of 7 children, and he was the first in his family to go to college. Mother went to college, and I'm not sure whether either of her sisters did go to college. She had 2 younger sisters. She had a younger brother who did go to college, Uncle Dwight.
But did she graduate from Purdue?
Yeah, she graduated from Purdue. She graduated from Purdue in home economics extension. And she took a job when she graduated riding a mule horseback in the Kentucky mountains, taking home engineering knowledge to housewives in the Kentucky mountains.
Home engineering.
Home economics.
Oh, home economics.
Home
Okay.
economics,
Okay,
yes.
yeah.
At that time, the children in the families in Kentucky, in the wintertime, they were sewn into their underwear.
Oh, they were sewn into their underwear.
Wow.
Right.
Why?
That's just the way they lived. That was what they did. And she was trying to bring modern ways of living to housewives in the Kentucky mountains.
So they would never take a shower during the winter.
That's right. No, not during the winter.
Not during the winter.
No.
Oh
Huh.
my gosh.
Yeah. So, when was she doing this in relation to when she met your father?
Well, she met my father in Purdue,
Right.
and he, of course, was in the Army. He was a second lieutenant. He was drafted, but he nevertheless went to officers' training school. And I think he enjoyed the whole experience. He taught horsemanship
Oh.
in World War II.
Oh, okay.
Right, he was in the cavalry,
Huh.
taught horsemanship.
Do you know how to ride?
I did eventually learn how to ride. Ann and I started taking summer vacations in the Colorado mountains.
Right. Right.
And we learned to ride then. Ann already knew how to ride. I didn't know how to ride.
Interesting. Okay, so they met as students,
Yeah,
and
they met as students and they married after World War I was over.
okay.
And Dad got discharged from the Army. I can't remember whether Dad went to France or not, to be honest. I don't think he really fought in World War I, but
Pesky fly.
he was active in training people to ride horses in the cavalry.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, he lost his hearing in World
Yes,
War
he
I.
lost. He was in the artillery. He was in the artillery. He lost his hearing because of the artillery shells exploding. So he must have actually fought.
Right.
And I had an old artillery shell in my bedroom when I grew up.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, I used it as a doorstop.
Like a big one, or?
A big one like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's a little buzzy. And Dad's father came to live with us when I was about that age. So that's Madison, where I grew up.
So how did you, because it says on the bottom,
Yeah.
Bobby. How did you get the Buzzy part?
Oh, I got the Buzzy part. It was my sister Frances who gave me the nickname Buzz. She had trouble saying, she was 3 years older. She had trouble saying brother, and so she said bruzzer, and then she said Buzz.
Brother.
Yeah, Helen and Buzz.
Well, do you think
Or
this is
Frances,
how? Yeah,
Frances,
I think-
Frances.
Yeah. Mom's note on the back says, Bob, well, this is not Mother's handwriting. Bob and Frances on front walk.
Yeah, yeah.
Bob.
Yes, I wouldn't have recognized the handwriting.
No, this one is West Lawn,
Yeah.
so that one is Mother's, but
Yeah,
yeah. So, you had a hat like that. When you wore your key, you wore a hat like that.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is you.
yeah.
Um,
And that's Helen's dog, Flecky.
yeah. See, I thought that this was my dad's dog, Flecky.
Well, he was both their
Both
dog.
of theirs. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So then we have we're skipping forward. What else? What
Well,
else
well,
happened?
well, how did you, these were Helen's photos?
I guess they were. I
Yes,
don't know
I
where
guess
they
they were.
came from. Yeah.
Yeah. I never had a collection of family photos like this.
Well, we're getting you one. Tell me a little bit more. You traveled
Yeah.
before you got married, before you had
Yeah.
kids.
Yes, I got a Rhodes Scholarship. That was my mother's doing. I didn't intend to be a Rhodes Scholar. But she, and I thought it was ridiculous because Rhodes Scholars were supposed to be athletes. And I was in no sense an athlete. I didn't play. I had TB at the age of 13, I guess. I spent a year in bed
Wow.
at the age of 13.
Intense.
And I was not allowed to run or play games for 5 years afterwards.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
That's when you raised pigeons.
yes, that's when I raised pigeons. Yeah.
And that's all you're going to say about it.
Not too happy about that. Yes, that was the time.
Yeah. Yes, I had to
Have something to occupy you.
have
Yeah.
something to occupy myself. Well, I just spent 1 year in bed, and my mother's hair turned gray that year.
Oh, wow.
So why do you say it was her doing that
Yeah.
you won that Rhodes Scholarship?
Well, she asked me to apply. She knew the women professors at the University of Wisconsin, in particular a couple of English professors who were women. And one of them said to her, you know, the University of Wisconsin hasn't had a Rhodes Scholar in years and years. Why don't you ask Buzz to apply?
Yeah.
And she said, all right, I will. And I think I said to her, Mother, this is ridiculous. Rhodes Scholars are supposed to be athletes. And she said, well, never mind, you go ahead and apply. I did graduate first in my class at the University of Wisconsin. So, there were maybe 2,000 students in that class. So I was a logical candidate for a Rhodes Scholarship, except for the fact that I was in no sense an athlete. I didn't worry about going off first to the regional interviews. What you did, you were interviewed by people who had been Rhodes Scholars and who are now professors at Midwestern universities. And they had candidates from 6 neighboring states meet finally in one grand show. And I can still remember my astonishment at the very end of this process of choosing the people who are going to be the Rhodes Scholars from these 6 states, to discover that I was one of them. I remember kind of leaning against the wall, out of the way, so that I wouldn't be conspicuous. Yes.
That's what you looked like then.
That's what I looked like then. Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah,
here's.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a high school photograph.
Oh yeah. Okay, so that's the end of high school, and then let's look at this one. Was this one your Rhodes? Oops. Your Rhodes Scholar photo? How about that one? Is it the same?
Yes, I guess it's possible.
Well,
It looks the same.
it does look the same. Okay, we got multiples. I thought there was one that was a little bit older.
So what did you learn on your Rhodes Scholarship in Oxford?
Well,
This one.
I had done a senior thesis in chemistry at Wisconsin and discovered that I loved doing research. So it was obvious to me, one of the options that was open to you was that you could get a doctor's degree if you wanted to. They didn't recommend it because the Oxford system was totally different from the American system. The Oxford system, you didn't take any courses, there were no seminars. In fact, someone explained to me when I was partway along with my doctor's degree at Oxford, that what I was getting a doctor's degree in was learning how to do research. I wasn't getting a doctor's degree in chemistry or biochemistry. I was getting a doctor's degree in learning how to do research, and if I wanted to do research in history, I could. That I had,
Interesting.
by the end of my PhD, maybe 3 months before I got my degree, I did some research to see how many people who took this exam. All you did to get a doctor's degree was take one exam at the end.
Oh.
And that was an exam on your thesis. And they hired someone, they looked at the title of your thesis, and they hired an expert at some other university in the subject of your thesis, and had him come in and interview you on the subject of your thesis to see whether or not it was a good thesis. And my interviewer was actually a very well-known chemist, and he was the brother-in-law of my research advisor. Yeah, but I'm sure he was quite unprejudiced, actually. That was the system. That was the way it worked. And he said, yes, he can have a doctor's degree.
So how long were you at Oxford?
I was 3 years at
3
Oxford.
years.
You were only allowed 3 years to get you were only given a Rhodes Scholarship for 3 years. And that was only if you were doing a doctor's degree. If you didn't do a doctor's degree, you were at Oxford for 2 years.
So is this you then? Probably?
Yes, that's probably my high school graduation.
Again?
Well, yes. but
Same
yeah,
time?
I think this is the actual high school graduation photo,
Okay.
and I think,
Handsome dude.
yeah, well,
Well,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
I don't like the way I looked at that time.
So, but you got a degree in,
Yeah, so I
Bio-
got a degree in biochemistry, but I never took any courses. I never went to any seminars. I didn't know any biochemistry. And in fact, if you had been giving it a name, you would have said that it was biophysics. But I just continued the project that I had started in chemistry, physical chemistry. I intended to get a doctor's degree in physical chemistry in the U.S.
okay.
But to my astonishment, I got a Rhodes Scholarship, and I had to go to Oxford.
Had to go.
And in a week, I had to figure out what I was going to do, because at the end of the week they wanted me to tell them at Oxford what I was going to do when I got there.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, Buzz.
I'm happy.
Happy birthday.
Well, thank you.
It's my dad's birthday today too. I was on the phone with him for three and a half hours.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
You can help
The Mac-
yourself
I think
to
I've had it
a
before.
beer in the refrigerator.
Excellent.
We're doing
Oh,
an
you're doing
interview.
You're good?
It's okay, it's okay.
I'm right.
Hey, how you doing?
And I'm Mary
to
Frances.
meet you.
Hi.
Hello.
They're interviewing me on what my life history was all about.
Do you want to take a break?
No,
No?
this is fine.
Okay. So, was being in England
Yeah.
the start of maybe your international travel?
Well, yes, I guess you would say that. The start of my international travel really was when I joined the Stanford Biochemistry Department.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah.
But you came back from
I came
Oxford.
back, I did postdoc work.
at the University of Wisconsin.
Yes, to learn physical chemistry. I finally learned some physical chemistry as a postdoctoral fellow, working in the same lab that I had done my senior thesis in.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. That was a fortunate connection for me, because I made friends with a professor who was on committees at the National Institutes of Health, and they were arranging a big conference on molecular biology, biophysics in Colorado. And they only invited a handful of young people, but they invited all the well-known biophysicists in the world, actually, to come to that conference. So I was invited to that conference because I knew this professor who was on the committee that was setting up the conference. And at that conference, Arthur Kornberg was one of the bigwigs, one of the scientific bigwigs, who was invited to come and talk. And there were other people from his department, actually, which was at Washington University, St. Louis. There were other people from his department who were there too. Anyway, at the end of that conference, he said, you know, our department is moving to Stanford. And when we move to Stanford, we're going to add a physical biochemist. And we would like to consider you as one of the possible candidates. Would you be willing to come to Washington University and give a job interview? And I said, yes, I'd be glad to do that. I had already learned at the conference that this was in the U.S., this was the central focus of molecular biology. And that whereas this conference was supposed to be about biophysics, it turned out that all of the big names in biophysics were working on molecular biology, which was just opening up. And so, anyway.
And you were told from the University of Wisconsin people
Yeah.
that would be a big mistake for you to go out to
Well, that
Stanford.
was my father, yeah.
Oh.
That was my father. My father was very devoted to the University of Wisconsin. He was a vice president. Was he a vice president then? He became a vice president anyway, not too long afterwards. And he was probably a dean then. And he thought it would be a big mistake for me to leave Wisconsin. But after going to this conference, it was obvious to me that molecular biology was the next thing that was going to happen in science in the world. And that in the U.S., the place that it was happening at was in Arthur Kornberg's department, which then was at Washington University, St. Louis, but which was moving to Stanford.
And was this lady connected then with either Stanford or Washington?
Well, I think that's Anne.
I think it is.
Yes, I think that's Anne. And she came as a postdoc working with another professor in the biochemistry department
At Stanford.
at Stanford. Yeah.
And when did she arrive, Buzz?
She arrived a couple of, I spent a sabbatical in Europe learning genetics, actually. And when I got back, she was at Stanford as a postdoc with Paul Berg.
And then you guys got together.
Yes, we did.
But
Yeah.
but just by luck, because the first time she talked to him, he kind of brushed her off.
Yeah.
You want to tell that story, Buzz?
Well, Anne will tell us.
I love that story.
Yeah, yeah. What I remember is that we had a secretary in the office who made the plane reservations when people went away to conferences. And it turned out that although, well, yes, Anne and I were going to the same conference, but it was in Philadelphia, actually, that we went to first. I was going to a Rhodes Scholars reunion. She was going to see her parents. And then we were both going to a conference in New Hampshire. Anyway, the secretary said, "Oh, Ann Baldwin is going, Ann Norris is going to that same meeting that you're going to. I will put you both on the same plane, and you can pick her up and drive her to the airport."
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah.
You just have been
And on the plane, she observed that my reading was Shakespeare's sonnets, which she thought was very good. She thought a scientist who read Shakespeare's sonnets, and that I had learned to do when I was at Oxford. One of my close English friends read Shakespeare's sonnets in his spare time.
Okay, all right. And then
Yeah,
this little kid came along.
yeah, yeah. Yes, I guess that must be David.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. We went to, very soon after we were married, we went to a meeting in Naples, Italy, and then went to a honeymoon in Greece. Yeah. At the meeting in Naples, there were a couple of people from our department, including someone who was a postdoc and somebody who was a professor. And the postdoc leaned over and said to the professor, he said, "Look, there's Ann Norris and Buzz Baldwin." And the postdoc said to him, "Yes, they just got married." And the professor said to him, "Julian, you're a goddamn liar."
Oh, I've never heard that one.
You're a goddamn liar.
They just got married. Oh, man.
Oh, sorry.
Well, when you, just after David was born,
Yeah.
I came out to take care of David
Uh-huh.
while the two of you went on a backpacking trip?
Well, I'm not sure where we went, to be honest. But it could be that we went on a backpack trip. Ann and I agreed when we got married that if I would take up backpacking, she would take up skiing.
And did that work? Are you a
Yeah,
skier?
yes. Oh, yes, I was already a skier. She was not. But I became a backpacker, and we went backpacking every summer, all the time we were married. Yeah. We went to the Sierras. And David can tell you, he's an enthusiastic backpacker still, but he learned to backpack as a very small child. Although, we wouldn't take David and Eric with us on our backpack trips until they demanded to go, because we had seen too many parents bringing small children on backpack trips who were just a pain in the neck on the backpack trips.
They didn't
So
want
we said, we aren't going to do that. We won't take them. We will hire babysitters until they demand to go.
And about how old were they when they said, we want to go too?
I don't really remember, but Ann will remember. But I'm guessing they were probably 6 or 7, something like that.
Pretty fun. And then, how old were they when you moved to Paris? When you did your sabbatical in Paris?
Well, yes, we had a sabbatical in Paris in 71, 72, and we were married in August of 65.
So David was about 5 and Eric 4.
David was, so Eric was 4 and David was 6, I guess.
And then Betsy came to help you.
They went to the local French school. David became fluent in French. Eric didn't become fluent, but it turned out when we got home that he understood French quite well.
And Betsy was like a nanny?
Betsy, yes, your mother sent Betsy to spend a month or so with us in Paris.
So are there some, I remember when I was in college,
Yeah,
the Vietnam War was on.
yeah.
And that was, you asked me, so
Yeah.
what was my opinion of the Vietnam
I
War?
see.
And I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
And you said, you ought to know.
Uh,
Whoa!
yeah. Well, Ann and I've just been watching the Ken Burns show. Yeah, yeah. And I've just been trying to remember what it was I thought about the Vietnam War. I was drafted into the Army at the end of World War II, and so, that was the European War. But the war ended, and they didn't have any use for draftees, and they let all draftees who could get back into college to get out. And I said, yes, please, that's what I'd like to do.
I'll go back to college any day.
Yeah,
Stay out of this
yeah,
war stuff. Yeah.
So I was in the Army for just 1 year, although I was drafted for a year and a half. And I never saw the Vietnam War.
40 minutes.
They after I finished basic training in the Army in Fort Lewis, Washington, we bivouacked on Mount Rainier. Yeah, yeah. They sent me for further training to Signal Corps Intelligence, and I became a code breaker, actually. Which was interesting because there were the fellow students in this code breaking school were all very bright, very interesting people. So that could have been a lot worse. I was lucky. The reason why I got into something that was as interesting as code breaking was that I had made friends with a fellow draftee who said, you know, the time is coming very soon when they're going to send us somewhere for special training, and we'd better find out what it is that they're going to do. Otherwise, it'll be some ghastly assignment. And so, although it was strictly forbidden to go around and talk to the people who were in charge of assigning the people in basic training for advanced training, we went around and talked to them, and we learned that they were getting a special call through for people to go to code breaking school. So I got a real break in the Army on that.
It's great. So had you been to college yet then, Buzz, if you just got
I
in?
had one semester
Right,
of
I was
college.
gonna say, sounds like the
I had
timing
one
was-
semester of college. But the second lieutenant who taught the code breaking school was getting out, and he picked me out actually as the person who could teach the code breaking school, provided I was willing to sign up for a couple of additional years at the Army, because it was considered a plum job. And if you took that job, you had to agree to stay in the Army for another couple of years. And I said, no, thank you. I would rather go back to college, so I never did that.
Is that about the same time that the British decoded that Enigma machine?
The Enigma machine was during World War II. That was Alan Turing. And I read about it later, but I never met Alan Turing. And I only saw the code-breaking school in England by accident because it was close to Oxford, and it was in a picturesque village about 10 miles from Oxford that I used to bicycle out to.
Oh, okay.
And I only learned much later that that was the code-breaking school
Oh my goodness.
that I was looking at. Yeah.
So you went to Oxford right out of college, right?
Yes, I went, well, no, I finished college. Is that right? It's hard for me to remember now. What did I do? I'm pretty sure I finished college before, yes, I did. I finished college before I got a Rhodes Scholarship. Yeah.
So it would have been October of 1950. That
It
was
would have been
reported.
October of 1950 that I went to Oxford. Yes, that's right.
And grandfather was the vice president of the University of Wisconsin at that
By
time.
that time, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what would you tell Matthew about lessons learned in your life that you would want him to know?
Well, I wouldn't give advice to anyone as a matter of principle. You know, I just wouldn't. That's the main thing I learned is you don't give advice to young people. You let them decide for themselves what they're going to do.
Okay, so then your advice would be, listen to that small, quiet voice inside yourself.
That tells you what you want to do and do it. Yeah.
Because I've heard that from you.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
advice.
That advice, yep.
So what at Stanford do you think, what idea or research at Stanford do you think was your best idea?
Well, going to Stanford was just remarkable for me because I worked with probably the greatest biochemist in the world at Stanford. He had set up the biochemistry department at Stanford, and it turned out that he had made a discovery for which he got the Nobel Prize. He was truly a very great scientist, and is still recognized as such for that today. This is Arthur Kornberg. And he picked me out of the people they interviewed for being the physical biochemist that they wanted to add to their department. But I, in fact, was able to work directly with him. He was very interested in physical chemistry, and he didn't put any pressure on me to work with him, but when he discovered that what I wanted to do was to work with him on DNA synthesis, he had discovered the enzyme that synthesizes DNA. That's what he got the Nobel Prize for. And I decided what I wanted to do at Stanford, because I was going to be making a change from being a physical chemist, basically, to being a biophysical chemist. It was very much a matter of a wild choice. What was I going to do? But when I discovered that I was getting an offer from the biochemistry department, which had Arthur Kornberg as its chair, then if I could, what I wanted to do was to work with him and learn from him. And that's what I did. And it was very successful and very informative to me.
Yeah. But was there one idea that you had that you think that, or do you think you just,
well,
your great work was that you just...
I had made friends back at Wisconsin with a biophysicist, a young biophysicist at the University of Minnesota. We met at a small local meeting and hit it off very well. And he told me what I should do was to take a research leave from Wisconsin. This was before I had the offer from Stanford. I should take a research leave from Wisconsin, even though I had only been there a year and a half. And I should go to Copenhagen, where he had been a postdoc, and learn about a developing field that was just opening up on learning the mechanism of protein folding. And I did that. And that was very informative. I've forgotten your question. What was your question?
Well, first of all, how many papers do you think you've written?
About 200.
200. And do you think there's one paper in particular that...
Well, the paper that people remember the best, probably, is the paper that I wrote after I'd been at Stanford, just a couple of years working with Arthur Kornberg, because the idea that we worked on, finding out by using physical methods how his enzyme is able to copy a DNA template. The papers, there were 3 papers actually that came out at the same time, and they were different aspects of that problem. But there was tremendous interest in those papers actually. I was just pointing out those papers yesterday actually to Peter Kim, who is now a professor, who had been a student of mine working on the protein folding problem, but who's now back at Stanford as a professor.
Okay.
So we should take a break.
Take a break? Okay.
Yeah, we'll take a break. This is terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should.
Foreign travel, as it turned out, and she loved that summer at Oxford. We rented an apartment and a Rhodes Scholar who was a close friend of mine. His mother was also coming over for the summer, and they rented an apartment that was only a block away. And his mother and my mother got on very well together, and she had a terrific time at Oxford. So that worked out very well.
Yeah, yeah. And so you bought china and did a lot of antique shopping?
Yes, we did all sorts of things. But what I remember chiefly was that Mother just enjoyed that summer enormously. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure, you know.
She had never really done any foreign travel, and it turned out she loved foreign travel.
Well, I remember getting a lot of stuff from you, from your foreign travels. You know, we got koala bears.
I see.
We got stuff from Chinatown.
Yeah.
We got a lot of things.
Yeah.
Because Uncle Buzz went traveling and then would come and visit.
I see.
And we had, I think we probably had the same bottle of rum
Yeah.
that you brought Mother for about 25 years under the kitchen counter.
I see.
There is also a family story about you teaching me to recognize the difference between a bull.
Yeah, yes, I remember that.
What do you remember?
The bull has a ring in its nose.
And what do you remember about your sister's reaction when she...
Yes, I remember she was.
Oh, Buzz!
Yeah, yeah,
You didn't.
yeah.
And you taught me how to count in Danish, and in German, and in French.
Yeah. I don't doubt it.
Do you speak any foreign languages now?
Well, I can speak some French. Until a few years ago, I could still read Danish. Yeah. I can still read German. I was never able to talk any of those languages except French, really, to be honest. But Anne was fluent in French when we were married. And she loved Paris.
You guys have gotten to travel quite a bit internationally.
Yes, we've traveled practically everywhere. Yeah. We went to China 3 times. Yeah.
Have you been to India?
Yes, 3 times.
What do you think about India?
Well, I loved India, actually. And so those trips to India were among my favorite trips. I have a former Indian postdoc who's head of an Indian Institute of Science, I guess you would call it, and who I see every so often. Yeah. He stopped in to see me just a few weeks ago. Actually.
Oh, that's nice. Good, good. Do you still go down to Stanford?
Yes, I go down to Stanford normally every morning, and then I come home around lunchtime now. Until just maybe 1 or 2 years ago, I used to stay in the afternoon too.
Wow.
But I'm now coming home at lunchtime.
That's why you need your driver's license renewed, so you can drive yourself?
Yes, that's right. I know they have a driver's license because I broke this leg. I have a disabled permit, and I can park in a disabled parking space, which is right outside the biochemistry department. The only problem is although there are about 18 of those disabled parking places, the competition for them is very tough, and I have to get there by 8 a.m. or I can't get a place. And I am now taking lessons for improving my posture and walking better and balancing better and so forth.
Who are you taking lessons from?
Oh, Ann and I both go to a fitness center, and we discovered that the people who work in this fitness center give lessons in balance.
That's great.
Yeah,
That is great.
so I'm taking lessons in balance now.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Yes, Dad didn't do that, and he should have, I think, done back exercises. You probably remember that at the end of his life, he was in a wheelchair, and his back was not in good shape. His mind was good right up to the end, but his back gave out a few years before the end. So I'm doing back exercises.
So do you want to live till you're 105?
No,
No?
no, I don't want to, but who knows?
Yeah.
You're not allowed in this country just to stop living when you've lived long enough.
Right,
So,
right. Not your choice.
yeah,
Yeah. Yep, might as well make those years
yeah,
the quality years.
yeah, yeah. So Ann and I decided that we would stay here in this, what her mother called this little bungalow. That was before we remodeled it actually, but it is. It's basically a little bungalow. But we love the woods here.
Yeah.
We went to look at a retirement home a few years ago, a retirement home where you could buy your own unit, your own house, basically own small house. But it didn't have any woods like that. And we decided we didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So Ann has really taken on the job of trimming the laurels and taking care of the flowers. I make sure the garden is watered now, but that's about all I do anymore. Really. And we have the neighbor's son who comes in and works. Ann and he work very happily together. He was here this morning, but he does a lot of the work actually, and she shows him what needs to be done.
Good. Yeah,
So-
good.
I don't know how long we'll be able to continue doing this, but I was greatly relieved to get my driver's license renewed because that's an essential, for me, I think that's an essential part of doing.
This is a very windy road to get
That's
up
right.
here.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
No.
if I didn't have a car and a driver's license, it would be not possible, I think, to live up here.
How is your eye?
Oh, my eyes are fine, actually.
You have a hole in one though, right?
I had, on my left eye, I had a kind of membrane grew over the pupil of the eye, grew over the retina actually, and had to be pulled off. And so that was a very touchy operation, but it was successful. And after that, they removed the cataracts in both eyes, and Ann has had the cataracts removed from her eyes. I just had the vision test as well as the written test at the Department of Motor Vehicles to get my driver's license renewed, and I have essentially 20/20 vision.
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not worried about my eyes.
Good, good, good. So Rick, is this running?
Yeah.
I want to get something to eat. Do you want something to eat?
Well, I'll wait until other people are eating. Are they eating?
Yeah, there's a little bit of snacking stuff.
Okay, okay. Well,
Actually, so here's the thing.
Keying inside.
Places I can dig it in.
So let me see how much time.
Yeah, how much?
What's your favorite word?
GMOP.
G-M-O-P. Jamop. That one? How,
GMOP, I said.
how do you pronounce that?
LM.
Oh, you pronounce it LM?
Yeah.
That makes sense. All right. Well, that makes sense. I mean,
No.
Face-to-face sessions that not every student can come to, can afford to come. But, oh, is Uncle Rick taking a picture? Yeah, so Miss Cheese here.
cheese.
And you
Talk to her.
put it into the laser printer and it
Oh,
sensitizes
man, she's
the
just so
emulsion and
excited.
develop that one.
Boom, boom, everything's
Then that goes,
well,
that's your master for
super happy. And
many tens of thousands of images that come out
very
of
happy
that.
for her. Very happy. Hi.
Hi there. Just doing a walkthrough.
Okay, I'm gonna get.
Wow.
Company's for profit and it's run by the guy by Leroy Hood.
I'd say.
Who you must know who he
Yes,
is.
I know Leroy, but
Yeah.
Whoops.
So this is his new company.
Oh, cool.
He was like the Lawrence